next speaker, we're going to be switching over, I believe, to Colorado. Todd Cornell, he's business consultant at Culture 668. Todd actually has spoken at a Canton Fair event that we did last year, and he was so inspired by the conversation that he actually then went to the fall Canton Fair. He's been multiple times in multiple years, and he lived in China for over 10 years. You'll be able to tell that he over 20 years. Oh my goodness. Okay. So twice as amazing as what we thought. But Todd is remarkable in his abilities, and so we've asked him to go about some of the practical doing business at the Canton Fair and in China in general, because he's so good at it. Todd, thank you so much for your time today.
So getting the most out of the Canton Fair, first of all, attending the fair with somebody who can bridge the cultural linguistic gap, very important. No self, no other. That's a really important thing to remember. We need to know our own situation. We also need to understand the person that we're interacting with and the culture that we're interacting with. So that's the first thing. Be sure that you're working with somebody who strictly understands you very, very well, and who also understands Chinese culture, and is able to bridge those two cultures in a good way, where they're able to be aware of some of the idiosyncrasies and differences that are going on. Visiting manufacturer rep booths is the one thing that you're going to do at the Canton Fair. There's a lot of them, and you can see me here visiting a rep booth. The people are friendly, they are very helpful, they'll answer your questions. But one thing that's important to know is, are you a manufacturer or a trade company? And sometimes that can be some of the challenges, because they want you to think they're a manufacturer, but they may be a trade company. And they, in their own way, will feel that that's okay to say that because they represent the manufacturer. So it's not that they're not being honest, it's just a different perspective. So what's the mode of qualification? One thing is that the Canton Fair has done a lot of work in qualifying a lot of these vendors and these factories, and that's great, but we can't completely depend on it because there's thousands and thousands of vendors there, and so we need to also do our due diligence at making sure that we're qualifying those manufacturers and factories ourselves. So one thing is that if you're going to attend the Canton Fair, what's the difference between attending the Canton Fair or just visiting manufacturing hubs? Manufacturing hubs are places, cities like Quanzhou, where they do a lot of bags, or Shenzhen, where you have a lot of technology. There's a lot of different manufacturing hubs, which are sort of cities where a lot of certain industries tend to build up factories. So if you're attending the Canton Fair, your product is sourceable at the Canton Fair, for one, because you'll have a lot of opportunity to see a lot of different manufacturers of whatever product that you're looking for. And at the same time, it gives a great opportunity to look at other product ideas, to see what things are going on in other parts of the world. One thing that I found really, really fascinating, I was looking for some products for a client, and seeing all of the different little added things that are actually not a part of that factory. There are other factories that are creating things that can work together really well with the product that you're working on. So that's another thing that's really good about the Canton Fair, is it's a great place to do some brainstorming on how to improve or make your product even better. And so if you're looking at just doing a specific product manufacturing project, then you might want to just consider visiting the manufacturing hubs, because that'll take you more direct to the factories, manufacturers who are doing exactly what it is that you're looking to have made. It may be more specific in the requirements, and so it's easier to just find a factory and just bypass a lot of that other creative stuff. If you already have everything set, you know what you want, then you might also want to look at a factory. But that's not to say that going to the Canton Fair won't also support you in finding more factories or more manufacturers. And I think it also depends on how common your product is at the Canton Fair. If it's something that's not so common, then it may be easier just to go direct to manufacturers. So one of the important things in doing business with Chinese factories is the relationship. And that's actually the most important thing of getting anything done successfully in China. So it's important that you do visit the factory. You want to tour the factory, share a meal. Most of the time, if there's a real interest in the Chinese factory, they're going to take you out for a meal. That's very standard. That's just the way they are. That's their cultural way of opening the door for potential and opportunity. And that's a way to establish positive relationships. You want to talk about what your interests are, what you're thinking of doing, giving them a sense that you're interested in working with them. And then you want to continue the discussions and be patient, because sometimes things do tend to take a little bit longer than we expect. So know self, know others. This is a really important thing in what I do. In China, culture eats everything for breakfast, essentially. So we don't want to rely on our own basic cultural understanding of how we do business. If we want to be successful in China, we want to understand the way the Chinese do business. So we need to learn from China in order to be successful in China. And that's something that comes out of The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And he talks about the importance of understanding those that we're interacting with. And when we're going to China, we're interacting with a very different culture. And so we need to put some effort into learning about that culture, learning about their habits, learning about their values and their ideals if we want to be successful. So Chinese thought is influenced by over 4,000 years of classical literature and classical philosophies. And this is something that we don't really understand, because as non-Chinese, we can't really understand the vast amount of knowledge and practices that they have that are in their language when they're speaking. Every day they use idioms that go back 2,000-3,000 years. They use expressions that express ideals and values that are very different from the ones that we hold. So the foundation of Chinese culture is based on 3 philosophies, and those 3 philosophies are based on harmony, which is very much a part of Chinese culture. And that is what the Chinese are trying to create and trying to establish in that relationship. You notice that behind Miss Lee, that the background said extending friendship and creating relationships. And this is the whole aspect of Chinese culture. Chinese culture is made up through the 3 philosophies, the foundation of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. And these 3 philosophies share the common thread of harmony. So going forward, there's 2 icons that I'd like you to pay attention to. One is the icon of Sun Tzu with strategy and diligence, and the other is the yin yang, which represents harmony and balance. So 3 things to consider: harmony, nothing is for sure, and relationship trumps all. So in harmony and in nothing for sure, we see that those are the harmony icons. So that means that in this, there is something going on there. There's a relationship going on in ways that is going to be very different from what we understand. Yin yang is something that shapes the Chinese culture, and that's through the coming together of differing forces or differing ideals. Conflict is something that we want to avoid, and so we notice that that's a strategy. Also, we want to be strategic in our interactions, because that strategy is important for helping us to be able to understand what's going on and be prepared for what might come. Practicing flexibility is also a strategy. Relationships are a strategy. And establishing a support system to achieve goals is also a strategy. Friendship is relationship, and that's also a strategy, but it's also an aspect of the harmony. So interpersonal relations are one of the most important things that we want to consider when we're interacting with Chinese companies and Chinese individuals for that matter. So that strong interpersonal relationship is the same as gold. It's the best currency that you can have in being successful with your distributors, with your factories, and with the people that you're interacting with. So we want to nurture friendly and supportive relationships, and this is a strategy. And so we never want to be difficult. We never want to use being difficult as a strategy. I worked for a company in a joint venture back in the 80s in Beijing, and they had an interesting way of doing things. And one of those was that one person was difficult and the other person was easy to get along with from the American side. And it was an interesting twist, but I come to find that being difficult really doesn't achieve anything in interacting with China. It actually sometimes can exacerbate the challenges and the difficulties. So there's an expression in Chinese, 惜墨如金, which means that precious ink is as valuable as gold. That expression is also used to refer to relationships, whereas the relationships are the ink. And when we have those precious relationships, that's as valuable as gold. So one thing we want to do as a strategy is to meet the company owner. We need to meet the company owner. If you don't meet the company owner and you're interacting with a service agent or with a customer service person, or even maybe somebody who calls themselves a manager, you will still have a hard time getting done what needs to be done. From your perspective, it's important to have that relationship with the boss. Nothing is for sure. There's a lot of things in China that in a way it's a harmony thing. They'll say things to want to meet your expectations, but sometimes it's not realistic and it doesn't happen the way that maybe you're expecting it to happen. So we want to be vigilant and protect ourselves, and that's a strategy. There's an expression in Chinese, don't have a heart that desires to harm others, but have a heart that protects yourself from others. And this is an expression that children in China understand. And it's something that is very much a part of the Chinese mentality and makeup. And we also want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to protect ourselves. And that's not to say protect from a very harmful way, but just from a business perspective, a personal relationship perspective. The vigilance is very important, and we need to know that that's what the Chinese themselves are also practicing. Not maybe doing it knowingly. It's already become such an innate habit that they do it without even thinking about it. So don't be an open book, which is a strategy. We don't want to talk a lot. As Americans, if you're American, we tend to like to open up to people. We feel like we can share a lot. We talk a lot about things because we feel like we're establishing a relationship or a connection. But that sort of a thing doesn't necessarily work in China, and it isn't also in your best interest. Any information that's shared can also be used however they feel the need. And so we want to get as much information as we can, but we also only want to give as much as is necessary. Contracts in China should not be regarded as a contract here. It's something where the relationship really is your contract. If you have a good relationship with a factory and a manufacturer, that is what's going to maintain the expectations. But things change, and so being flexible, being able to work through challenges. If you want to take somebody to a legal situation, that might actually ruin the relationship. If you're wanting to maintain a relationship, it's really best in just retaining that relationship and maintaining through the relationship with working through things, being flexible, finding a balance, finding ways to work things out, working in the best interest of both parties and finding that harmonious relationship.